Hello and welcome to today's presentation for the Grimsby Public Library of Fall Organic Gardening 101. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Teeft. She's done a few gardening talks for the library now during the pandemic, and the two before have been spring gardening talks, and this is our first try at a fall gardening talk. So I'm looking forward to what Tia has to say. So Tia, besides doing some volunteer work for the library for such things as our Grimsby Author Series blog post, is also she also works at Mingle Hill Farms, and she recently started working for Jordan's Flowers. Is that?
You got it.
Okay, great. So she's highly involved with growing things all year round. So I will turn it over to Tia for the presentation. I'll just turn off my camera and sound, but I'll pop in for the questions definitely at the end. And just a note about questions, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat at any time. I think Tia is going to pause during the presentation to take a look at those questions, and she'll also get to more questions at the end. So thanks again, Tia, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. And welcome to the Fall Organic Gardening 101. Like Ryan said, done a few of these through the spring. So excited to sort of showcase what you can do with your garden through the fall this year or in future years. So again, about me, my name is Tia, or Tian. I am an organic farmer up the hill in St. Anne's. I also farm with flowers. I work a flower shop, and I'm a gardening mentor. So I do a little bit of work just with individuals who want to know a little bit more about growing for themselves and working with the earth. So a few things that we're going to cover today, which going to be a lot. I'll try and take it relatively slow, but we have a lot to get through. Like Ryan said, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat box. And if they build up, we'll address them, but we will get to everything at the end for sure. So for today, we're going to go up setting up a fall garden bed if you don't already have a garden. So that's just going to be nice and quick. We will make sure to mainly address if you have an existing garden, how to do a soil refresh, care for it, crops to plant, whether it's as seedlings or direct seeding, a fall plant protection plan in terms of sort of structural issues you might want to work with, some fall planting notes, literally how to design your garden to make it ergonomic for you, saving seeds and all the details that come with that to make sure you have the best future seed crop that you can. And then, of course, we have to quickly address a little bit of planting garlic because that is coming up nice and quick. So for our first one, we'll go over quickly making your fall garden bed. So again, the soil is the heart of your garden. So in the image shown here, this is a raised garden bed. You can, of course, grow in ground, but in terms of planting in the fall, this will be nice as well, having a raised bed, because the soil, it has the opportunity to be a little bit warmer, and you can sort of create your own soil from there by adding a nice amount of compost. You know exactly where the soil is coming from. You may not get all of the fallen leaves, which are fantastic as mulching. But if you have any walnut leaves or anything, it's nice to be able to create your own little garden bed here because you don't really want walnut leaves in your garden space. And they're everywhere right now, everything's dropping. So in the image on the, I want to say the right side of your screen, there's just a little sketch there, and that is essentially your garden bed. And when you're creating your garden, especially if it's going on like a grass turf, you're going to want to put down a cardboard first. You're absolutely welcome to mark and cut out the grass where you're going to plant your garden, but that'll depend on the tools you have on hand and any capabilities of being able to physically dig and pull out that grass. But cardboard is a great option to suppress those weeds. And you want to make sure that if you do have cardboard, it is actually sticking out a little bit on the sides. You can see my cursor here. It's sticking out on the sides a little bit just to stop those weeds that start to encroach to go up through the garden bed. So once you have your cardboard underneath of your garden box, whether it's made of wood or you have like a Vita garden or something like that, you want to put in some organic matter in this layer here. So this can include, again, fallen leaves, avoiding a large amount of walnut. You can put in lots of straw or hay. If you have a really deep garden bed, like if, again, making it ergonomic, if you don't want to do a lot of bending over, and you have like a 3-foot garden bed, then maybe you put some twigs or branches or like stumps in the bottom there. That will just, it will decompose over time, of course, and it just gives you a bit more bulk underneath, to allow you to have less soil to purchase for this section here, because this organic matter will compress quite a bit once that soil goes on top. So when you're putting in your organic matter, load it up, because it will sink down, especially if it gets compressed from rain or like a lot of moisture post snowfall, that kind of thing. Then your next layer is your soil. For soil, you want to make sure you have a nice mix that's it's airy, especially if it's going in a raised garden bed or in a pot. You don't want to have too heavy of like a triple mix or topsoil. You want to mix it in with compost and organic matter. Sheep manure is a great option. Sheep as in the animal, not like a sheet of wood. You want to put that in there. That's a great option for you. I love to use worm castings mixed in with my soil. And then moving to the top layer, this is where the compost also comes in, is this soil is a mix of a bunch of different items and options to bring more nutrients. The compost is purely nutrient dense, as acting as a mulch for the top layer of your soil to slow compaction, to bring more nutrients to your plant. So when it does rain or when you do pour water down here through the top of your plant, it allows the water to distribute evenly as well across the top of your garden bed, instead of just pounding down into your soil layer here and then running right through to the base. So it's important to have a compost layer on top. And I always love, which I didn't incorporate it on this little map, is a shallow layer of mulch. Something like straw is great, or again, those leaves just all cut up nice as a top layer, again, to help stop compaction, to stop water evaporating out on those really hot days. Because even in the fall, of course, we still get those hot days because climate change, and in October, we can still get hot days beyond or up to 20 degrees. And you also don't want your plants to cook. So it's important to mulch still, even through the fall. So that is for creating a nice, quick garden bed. You can, of course, do container planting or right into your current existing land. There's no wrong way to garden or to start off any of this. So I highly recommend playing around and seeing what you can do, especially in the fall, because in the spring, it is, I will not say it's high stakes, but you're sort of running against a timeline to make sure that everything is in the ground before a certain date so that it has full maturity to get there. In the fall planting and growing is amazing because it's a bit more relaxed. There's less expectation for what you're going to take from the earth and give back to it. You can sort of play around with what you like to grow, and cold weather crops are some of the best crops, especially for soups and stews. So that's why fall growing is one of my favorites. So we've already talked a little bit about obviously making the garden bed, but if you're just refreshing an existing garden, it's important to give a fall refresh. Even if you did all these extra layers through the spring to start your garden, it's important that you do this sort of thing to prepare as you go into a season, because you want to give it those nutrients and everything that it can possibly get before, you get everything in the ground. So if you have an existing garden bed, I highly recommend adding a few more layers of compost into your garden bed, a few inches as a top layer. You can take like a a pitchfork or a garden shovel or trowel and just lightly turn it through to aerate it through the top layer of your soil, just to invigorate a few more nutrients. The next thing I love is vermicompost. That's worm castings, so worm poo. It's called the black gold of the garden. It is, you can buy it in like small bags or 20-liter bags, relatively cheap. I highly recommend an organic option, just because, again, you know where things are coming from and everything is listed on the back in terms of what nutrients are going into those worms and then the castings. So it's nice to have those as gives you just a little bit more of integrity of what's going into your garden. So when I'm doing worm castings, once I've put my seedling into the earth, I like to put worm castings just around the base of my plant, just so that when I water, the nutrients from the worm castings soaks through that entire plant. You can also just sprinkle it on top depending on how much you have or how many plants you're putting in. You can just put a soft layer on top of your compost or your existing soil. Again, just to reinvigorate, it's full of nutrients, and it works with the next one, which is mycorrhizae. That's a mycorrhizae fungi, which works with the roots of plants to sort of open them up to things like more water intake or taking up nutrients or working with the existing soil textures. So for using mycorrhizae fungi, you can get it at multiple nurseries, even this time of year. You can order it online. There's a great company called Myke, M-Y-K-E, and they're fantastic. It comes in a powder form. I don't know much about diluting it at all if you would with water, but for the mycorrhizae, you just put a little sprinkle inside a hole that you're gonna transplant your seedling into. So it literally goes to like the root ball of your plant. So you have your layer of soil for refreshing, you dig your hole, little mycorrhizae, you tuck in your plant, and then you put the worm castings around it. So you're sort of just giving your plant everything it needs to make it through the fall and give you the best possible crop and to see what you can do with your garden. So when to plant. This one is, I won't say iffy, but because our seasons have changed so drastically in the past couple of years, it's a bit more about, again, soil temperature and feeling the weather, and less about that hard last frost date. In the Farmer's Almanac, it'll say usually October 13th or 16th or something, usually around Thanksgiving, end of October is like the last frost date here between zones 6 and 7. So what I highly recommend is researching the crops that you specifically do enjoy planting, to know a little bit more about them and the weather they prefer. But a general rule of thumb is if the soil is still workable, get everything in the ground. So when I say soil temperature here, example, radish thrives being seeded between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius. The seed just sort of gets invigorated at those temperatures, and it has a faster and better germination rate. Keep in mind for everything for fall planting, the days to maturity, which is noted here, they're longer. So for radish, ideally takes 30 days, 35 days to produce from seed to harvest. It's now going to take 45 days because the nights are cool, the sunlight exposure is a lot less. So it's important just to sort of maybe add at least half or a quarter of the time that it already takes onto those existing days already. So just to give yourself a little bit of a timeline and not expecting that things are going to continue to grow as they grew for you through spring and summer. In terms of weather for when to plant, again, soil temperature is super important, but for weather, things like your Asian greens, like tatsoi, pak choi, even arugula, those things are quick to bolt bolting just means that the plant goes very quickly from baby seedling to flower to seed, because it's trying to get through its life cycle before the plant dies. So those sort of items, you want to make sure you're timing them right. We're getting nice cool evenings here. So around now and in the next week is probably a fantastic time to get your Asian greens into the earth, because it'll give them those cooler nights to continue to grow, lots of sun exposure, but we're not getting those like over 25-degree days that are really, I mean, not yet, that are really going to affect the plant and then speed up its growth too fast. So, and that goes for seedlings and direct sown. So yeah, just take care to look on that seed pack, see the days to maturity, and keep moving from there. For when I mention at the bottom right here, fall planting versus overwintering, so they are two different things. So for example, for fall planting, you can get that radish, you can get turnip, baby leaf lettuce, but for overwintering, you can plant things like spinach, kale, onions and bunch onions, things that are, or cabbage and broccoli if you've already put those in the ground, they needed to go in a little bit ago. Those are things that usually their days to maturity are a lot longer, and they're incredibly winter hardy. So even in this photo, like the texture of kale leaves is incredibly dense, and they can withstand our winters here, even if they're left uncovered. I mean, of course, pests in the winter, they do go lower, but they're still prone to that through the spring. But overwintering also means that you're going to get that earlier crop. So if you're like a die-hard grower, you must have your kale in March, because usually it wouldn't be ready until like late June, early July. Then maybe overwintering is for you. And I highly recommend right now getting a lot of your overwintering crops in the ground, like maybe your bunch onion, your kale, all that kind of thing. So while I'm thinking of it, I'm not sure if I've even listed in here anywhere to get plants, but this time of year can be incredibly hard to find some fall seeds. Super easy. Everyone's usually still fully stocked or have replenished their stock for seeds. So you shouldn't have a hard time with direct sowing certain items, which you can of course direct sow your Asian greens, tatsoi, pak choi, mustards, all of that. But if you're looking for seedlings of like a kale plant or a Swiss chard, or even onions, which do take a long time, try looking on like a Facebook marketplace or reaching out to your local farmers to see if they're providing a fall plant sale, or if they have any extra seedlings available, because they obviously want to encourage you to grow as well. And they will likely have spares. Instead of you not growing something, it doesn't hurt to even reach out to ask. So difference between fall planting and overwintering, definitely something to keep in mind. So some of the crops that you'll want to plant. So direct seeding, I've mentioned radish, turnip. I prefer the Hakurei turnip. It's a white turnip and it's beautiful. It has more of a softer flesh. It's not as like pithy as I find those purple top turnips, which are still beautiful, but the Hakurei also has a shorter like growth time. A loose leaf lettuce, so that's something like a mez mix or a baby leaf mix that has come already pre-mixed in a little seed pack that you can sprinkle right into the soil in nice tight little rows that you can grow and cut and grow and cut. Keep in mind that obviously for a leaf lettuce or arugula, it's going to take longer between your cuttings, so you're not going to have like leaf lettuce a cut every week or every 2 weeks, because it won't be able to provide such prolific growth. It's probably going to take 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks. So a big thing, especially for direct seeding certain items and seedlings, of course, if you can get your hands on them, is succession planting. So for radish, the turnip, the leaf lettuce, the arugula, put in, I mean, I don't know how much radish you're going to eat, but if it's like your favorite absolute crop in the world, maybe you put in 10 or 15 seeds because they have such a high germination rate, and then 10 to 14 days later, you put in another 20 seeds, and then another 20, and then another, and that'll keep your crop going. This year, I think I was, or last year technically, I guess I was pulling from my garden until about January 16th. Of course, things like radish started to get a little pithy just because the moisture in our winter, because we didn't have like the hard snowfalls, it started to get a little bit more tough. But we did all of these certain things, which I'll talk about in the next couple slides, to extend our season a little bit further. For seedlings, you can of course direct seed lettuce, like head lettuce, but it's in this column only because if you want a head start, because the season is a little bit shorter in the fall, it's usually a little bit faster if you buy it as a seedling. Spinach is fantastic because even if you don't get a big or any harvest from it right now, it will overwinter for you, which is fantastic. It's one of my favorite crops to put in the winter because I know I'm going to get a nice huge pull from it in March, and I'll keep taking from it probably until early June when it starts to get a little too warm, and then I'll pull it to make way for more of my fruiting veg like tomatoes. Beets are great, again, as seedlings because they take a long time. And ideally with beets, you'll probably get a few more like baby beets because they won't mature into like those big beets. But the smaller beets can also be nice because they are a bit more tender, and anything that gets a little bit of that like light frost on them has a nice crisp flavor to them. So fall beets are one of the best ones as well. Kohlrabi, I actually have only grown it once, but if you're a huge fan, go nuts. It is a great crop for creating something like a remoulade or something. It's like a play on a coleslaw. That can be a fantastic crop for that. And then mustard greens, you can do it as a direct seed and do a bunch of minis to have a cut and come again crop, or you can do it as a seedling, one large plant. Bok choy is also pak choy. Gai lan is a Chinese broccoli, and those are just individual seeds create individual plants, and it's one tall stem. It's quite easy to get your hands on these sorts of seeds, and they produce really nice fresh crops. And for Gai lan, that crop usually actually matures from seed in about 4.5 to 5 weeks. So you can get a nice full crop by the time the growing season has started to really slow down. I definitely won't say end because you can go year round. I will try and provide a few books at the end as well if anyone's interested in some nice winter studying books, which is a nice task to do in the winter. So protecting your fall garden. So there are many different ways to do this. Obviously at a farm, we have one heated greenhouse, we have a hoop house. There's a few different options, but as a home grower, especially depending on the space that you have, this can be a bit more of a like fun experiment that you sort of play around with to see what works for you. So I put a photo here. This photo is from, which I didn't source. I apologize to West Coast Seeds for stealing their photo. But they have all of these options available. The polytunnels and hoops and everything is available at Lee Valley as well. You can get other options like this from like Canadian Tire has stuff, Home Hardware. So there's definitely abundance of this, or you can try some PVC pipes for the hoops. You can sort of play around with what you have, especially if you are like a heavy recycler, you can always find something, right? So I put both low tunnels and shade cloth in this because for fall, you need both, ideally, just because, again, the season is unpredictable. So we'll start with if you have a in-ground or a raised garden bed, this hoop method is incredibly helpful. With raised garden beds, the hoops just want to be a little bit longer so they can stick down the sides of your garden bed to stop them from like popping out. In a raised bed, you just want to really secure them, and that's the hoops themselves. What I did last year is I bought just the hoops, and they didn't really go deep into the ground, but I took like long landscape nails and I just pinned my poly down so it sort of held the structure in place. So Cool season materials include the poly, which is this nice, beautiful sheet here. And then you've got your hoops underneath of that. I say pins or sandbags. The pins are just to hold this down here. If you don't want to damage your poly at all, that's where the sandbags come in, just as a weight on the side, so you can continue to reuse without getting holes in the side of your poly. The cloche, I put optional because that's if you have only a few odds and end plants, or if you're on a balcony and you're getting really high winds and you don't want anything like this, and you just want to cover it with a single item. So a cloche could include like a gallon milk jug that you've cut the handle off of and you can cover, or the bottom, you can open the top and use it as like a vent, or literally a cloche. You can get ones from Lee Valley as well. They have great options that have little tops that turn, so you can open and vent it without having to remove the whole cloche. I put a soil thermometer, again, optional, but if you're really specific on the temperature of the soil from now through to winter to sort of see what temperature you're growing in, or what maybe the temperature of the soil was when your crop did fail, or potentially failed, you can have those records. A cold frame, again, a cold frame is incredibly optional, and it's if you like to build. It is essentially a garden box that has an angled lid on it that you can, let's pretend that this is actually the garden box right here. You can literally open the lid up, reach in to grab your crop and close it. And it's slanted because it helps to bring in sun, reflect the sun, and make sure snow doesn't sit on top if it's not a huge snowfall. So there's a bunch of different options for covering the garden. When you're building this, I will say in this photo, this structure, this is the one that I tend to gravitate towards. I put in my hoops, make sure they're secured in the ground, and then I put on a shade cloth. And that doesn't mean it has to be a permanent shade cloth, but it's nice to have that as an option on the inside, because it still does let light in, but especially early in the season, around right now in September and early October, when the sun still gets incredibly hot, when you take off the poly, you still want another protection layer under there. So the shade cloth can be helpful on these really hot days to protect, especially, like I said, if you have something that's quick to bolt like an arugula, you want to make sure the shade cloth is already in place and you're not constantly interchanging a poly and a shade cloth and a back and forth, you know? So it's nice to have those already prepared. On days when it's incredibly hot, if you do have poly and you've chosen to use it, you must make sure that the poly is removed. It is a plastic and it will build condensation, which not only adds humidity and moisture to your soil, but your plants will literally cook themselves inside because it's creating an incredibly dense little greenhouse. So that is definitely something to think about if you're going away for a week or something. Someone has to take care of your garden, or leave it off and risk it and see what happens. So just a few things to think about of how to protect your garden as we move through the season. I will mention, especially for items if you're overwintering them, snow is a fantastic insulator. That is, of course, if we get nice snow. If it's a really damp season, then of course it can affect the quality of your soil because it can get a bit more disease ridden potentially. But what's great about winter, the best thing about winter and winter growing, is that pests are pretty much non-existent because they're elsewhere or they're dormant as eggs, and you don't have to think about them until early spring. So plant smart when you are actually planting your garden. So for example, in my current garden, it is a big U shape that I can just walk into, which is fantastic. But when I'm planting in the winter, I'm going to make sure, or I'm planting now for the winter, I'm going to make sure that the crops that I use most frequently are at the front. Certain items like my leaf lettuce is close. Any herbs are close, even if they're just sitting on the top of the soil in a pot, something that I can easily reach for, because if you're trudging through the snow to get to your garden, you don't want to have to go to the back of your garden to reach over a kale that you're overwintering that is just in the way and you can't get to what you need to get to. Speaking of kale, something that you're overwintering, try and keep, I will say, to the outside, to the perimeter, to the north side, to allow the sun to still hit your new crops so that the overwintered crops are at the back and not shading anything out. And if it's something that you're overwintering, again, like kale or onion, ideally those will all come out before your hot or warm season veg goes in, like your peppers, your tomatoes, your eggplant, that kind of thing. So it's nice to think ahead of the crop rotation and succession that you're going to be creating as you plant your fall garden, which is why it's important to plant smart so that you know what's coming in the next season. And on the umbrella of all of this, you're still keeping in your mind the crop rotation. So to avoid tomatoes in the same spot, or to not plant strawberries where garlic was last year because they don't like to be in the same place, or to plant your broccoli where your beans were because you know there's a lot of nitrogen in the soil. All these different little tips and tricks to allow you to plant smart, to set you up even better for spring. So what will you cover? So again, fall harvest versus overwintering. If, example, in my U-shaped garden, or if you have just one single garden bed, planting like items together, you don't want to have to cover one item here and then one over here and then one over here. When you have overwintering stuff mixed in between, it's going to be nice for you to plant all of your lettuces, tatsoi, pak choi in one spot that you know has to get covered, and then leaving all those overwintering items that don't need to be covered to another section that you don't have to deal with. So you're also not wasting any of your structural items, or you're not investing too much extra in those sort of things. So the sun exposure just comes back to what I was saying in terms of when you're actually laying out your garden, you want to make sure that the sun, or if you're even building a new garden bed, of course, I should bring that up. If you're building a new garden bed, keep in mind where the sun is, even in winter, so that if you do want to do a fall crop this year and next year, that you know the sun is going to hit it from all angles. So keep notes. I do bring this up again, but keep notes of everything, the sun exposure in your yard, where the sun is, what time the sun actually starts to go down, when your garage blocks out the sunlight in the winter. All of that kind of thing is going to help you plan for each different season. And then succession, will it work for you? This is something that we've already gone over very briefly, but it's important to know that if you're going to have the space for succession, and you can do succession anywhere. If you have a garden already, you can plant radish and turnip and lettuce into pots. There is no stopping you from continuing to grow or have a consistent harvest, even if you have to spread out a little bit in the fall. So my next, one of my favorites, garlic. So this is something that goes into sort of our discussion of crop rotation. Hopefully you have a few separate spaces in your garden that you're able to plant garlic, or a neighbor who lets you use some of their soil to plant garlic in, because you do want to avoid garlic being in the exact same place year after year, especially if there was any disease or pest that affected it in prior years, because you don't know what is still dormant in that soil. So I'll go over a little bit of like preparing some planting notes and how and when to harvest. But if there are any more questions about garlic, I will tackle those as they come in. So when you're preparing to plant your garlic, for your soil, the first thing, as always, is to give your soil a refresh. Depending on where you've picked to plant it, you want to add a few inches of compost and then turn it through the soil again with like a garden fork or a shovel, just to sort of dig it into that soil a little bit. You're not fully turning the soil at all. You're not breaking it up too much, just to aerate it. and get those nutrients just below the surface. So when you are deciding what garlic to plant, as amazing as it is to be able to just go to the grocery store, I will say definitely try and buy a local garlic, only because buying from the store, especially if it's not an Ontario grown, you don't know what potential pests or diseases it previously had, that you could then be bringing into your garden, into the area. So getting seed garlic from a local farm, especially local, just to keep things close, you know that your garlic hasn't traveled far and it is made for the zone or grown for the zone that you're planting in as well. So you can reach out to farms. Mingle Hill Farms, we are selling garlic now for planting. A lot of other local farms generally provide garlic for sale. Even if they don't outright say it, you can give them a call and they usually have a few heads, of course, depending on what you're looking for. But knowing that they've been grown local before and at farms, you know that they're made for the conditions that we have. And here's hoping that, of course, you get the same outcome as the garlic that you bought. So a few planting notes. I wish I brought a head of garlic with me right now. So when you first start, you want to, your soil is prepared and you want to crack your garlic. So that is just usually what I do is I don't even have a garlic. I flip my clove upside down and I bash it on a table and it just pops the stem right out and the cloves fall apart. You can also do the tried and true where you just dig your hands into it and rip it apart. This is just separating the cloves from their stem. I will say for the type of garlic to use, I prefer a hard neck garlic. It just means literally the stem of the garlic is hard. It's not like flimsy all over the place. I find they just hold up to our conditions a little bit better, and they're usually easier to hang and cure, especially if that's something that you're going to be doing. So once you crack your garlic and you have all your cloves, you're going to make sure that the skin of your clove is still intact on your garlic. You don't want to peel your clove to expose the garlic as if you're ready to chop it up for dinner. You want to keep that soft little husk around it, because that's going to protect it while it prepares to go into dormancy as well. So you've taken apart your head of garlic, you have your clove with the skin on it intact. Usually around here, middle to end of October is a great time to plant. So at Mingle Hill Farms, we've planted, I think, on October 21st for the past 2 years in a row, which just happened to work out that way. But even if it gets a little into November, that's okay. But you do want to make sure that the soil, of course, is still workable, because it's a winter annual, right? You do want to give it the best chance, and you don't want the soil to already be freezing cold or unworkable and you couldn't put it down far enough before you even get it in the ground. So when you're planting the garlic, plant them about 6 inches apart, and maybe, depends on the type of soil you have. So if you have clay soil, maybe 3 inches down, because obviously there's a bit more nutrients and it's dense and it'll hold that clove in the ground for you. If you have like a sandier, loamy soil, then you'll want to put it a little deeper down, just so that if it rains, it doesn't start to expose that top of your garlic. And the depth of your clove is measured from the tip of your garlic to the top of the soil line. So not from bottom of your garlic, right from the top. So make sure it's down there nice and deep. So I guess it depends on the size of the garlic that you're planting this year. So I try and keep them in, and at the farm, of course, we try and keep all of our garlic in straight rows. It depends on how many you're planting. We keep them all labeled. We make a little map of the garlic, because of course, once they all come up, they can look relatively similar depending on what variety you have. So we label them at the site and on a piece of paper. And it also helps for weeding if you have to do that in the spring, just keep them in rows. And it does depend on the space you have as well, of course. So spring, we're flashing forward, everything's in the ground, everything looks good. Your garlic has started its process in the early season of fall. It's gone dormant over the winter, and now it's March-ish, and the tops of your garlic are green and popping through the soil. Beautiful. You can do a light weed if they need it, but usually you just leave them be. It does depend on, of course, what's been in the ground already. If weeds are taking over, try and clear it up so they have space to continue to flourish. And then once you do get to your garlic is full and it's large, it does start to send out something called escape. So this is like the flower. I believe it's called a bulbil or a bubble, depends on how you say it. And that is at the top of the escape. It does produce like another set of seed, which you can grow. It does send that out the top. So it starts to put all of its energy into the escape. So what you have to do when those start to show up is once the escape starts to curl at the top, cut it off or break it off. You can use these, you can pickle them, you can saute them, you can make pesto from them. They're great to save and use, but you want to cut that off so that the energy of your garlic continues to go to the clove to let it develop just a little bit more before it's ready for harvest. So around here, our garlic is usually ready in mid-July. It'll depend, of course, again, on the variety or the conditions that you have. We take a pitchfork and we just dig it up, pull it out, wrap it and label it. So that we can hang it from inside the barn, which is a nice, cool, dry place. And it gets lots of airflow. You don't want to keep it anywhere humid or out in the sun. And you know when it's ready to harvest because about 3 to 5 leaf tips have started to go brown. So garlic is pretty much telling you when to harvest it, because after that point, when more than like these 5 tips have gone brown, that's when it started to decay. And decay doesn't mean it's like going moldy or anything. It just means that the layer of skin around the garlic has started to disintegrate, and it means it just won't cure or store as the same quality. So it's important to get it out. Also, if your soil is too moist, don't wait for those leaves to start to go brown. Harvest it because you don't want it to rot. And if you have any pests like the Allium leaf miner, which looks like a little red worm going through it, you can see markings on the leaves. Make sure to take that crop out. Know that you can't sell that crop and you cannot cure it. You just have to open it up, store it, take off all of the skin so you're ready to cook with it. And then I usually put it in a freezer bag, or I blitz it up, make it and mince it and put it with some oil, put into ice cube trays and put it in the freezer. So you want to use it right away just because you don't want that disease to keep spreading. So you try and cure it, it'll probably be eaten by another bug before you get to it. So that's garlic. Lots to do with it. It's exciting. Share your bulbs with friends. That's always a fun thing. So saving seeds, we have a nice little bit chunk of time to go through some seed saving. So if there are any specific questions about plants, please throw them in the chat. And I hope Ryan, let me know if there's anything specific that people want to cover. But I'll go over a few general things. So the only seeds that you can and should save are from known heirloom, heritage, or open pollinated varieties. These should be marked on a seed pack or from the grower that gave them to you. Saving them from like hybridized plants, it usually means that future generations of these plants, they won't be true to type, and you can get weird growths from them, which again is fine, but you want to stick to that heirloom variety because it grows true and you're keeping it true. It's more than just about the variety. It's about providing a resilience to a variety and holding on to it so it continues for generations. For example, there used to be 1,000 different varieties of rice, and because of how the world works and how industries have come into it, there's now only 9 varieties that can actually be harvested that are true varieties. So it's really important to hold on and save these seeds. There's a beautiful farm in Grimsby up the hill called Sentimental Farm, who are dear friends. They do a very beautiful job of holding on to, or even just saving seeds for themselves and selling to people, just to continue the life of saving those seeds that are really important varieties. So I highly recommend saving your own seed. Also, it can allow you to cut down on costs later, and it ensures, again, the future generations of these heirloom plants. So when you're saving seeds, save your best produce for collecting seeds. Don't use that one plant that's starting to die off. Tag these amazing, hardy, strong plants, so you know that's the plant you're going to save the seed from later. Some plants will cross-pollinate. So those includes things like squashes, carrots, and lettuce. So they do need sort of segregation when like to harvest them, because if you want them to produce true to their offspring, I should say. If you let lettuce just go to seed in the field, you don't know if it's crossed with the lettuce in the bed next door or something like that. So usually you can do the paper bag method and put them over the lettuce or carrot seed, cut the stem, seal it, and then you can let it finish drying again in a cool, dry place. And then you shake it and all the seeds will come out. Things like squashes, always had a really hard time saving seeds for squash, only because they do cross-pollinate so easy with other gourds. So definitely try. It can actually be kind of fun to see what they cross-pollinate with. So that one is a bit of more of a play by ear. I still prefer to buy like my cucumbers and squashes, but they're also a lot of fun to sort of see what you're going to get. For seed saving, it doesn't only start right now. Things to keep in mind for spring, things like radishes, you can save them through like May and June once you've had your early crop of them, and they'll start to go to seed from there. And again, with those paper bag method, just cut them once they've created little pods that are starting to age and dry, and then you can just pop them open or shake them in a paper bag. And then for things like, I actually made a little demonstration. I hope you can see this. This is the water or fermenting method. So I have a mason jar here, and what I've done is I've made a score, like a little X on the bottom of my tomato. I find this is the easiest method for squeezing. I'm not going to do it here because it's going to go all over the computer. Is you just squeeze this and into your mason jar, and the seeds just spray out without having to like cut it in half and scrape out the seeds that you want. It's just so quick and it comes out seamlessly. I already did it for this variety. In here, I have the blonde Hopkin tomato, very smoky yellow cherry tomato. It's from Sentimental Farm as well. I know they're an heirloom variety. I know because they saved this seed, and then I grew it from their saved seed, and it's the same variety. So I'm now saving it. So I put it in this water. I put a cheesecloth over it, and I just tighten this on top. So for tomatoes, usually they can take anywhere from 1 day to 4 days to get all that gel off. That's why you're doing the water fermenting method, to get like the jelly coating off of your tomatoes. And this is just so that it encourages better germination later. So there's less stress on the seed for when it has to germinate. And so it can germinate. If there's the jelly coating, especially if you put it on a paper towel right away, you'll notice when you go to pick those seeds off the paper towel, it's going to take you hours. And I hope you have a good TV show on, because it's going to take forever to pick them off. And you can damage the seed as you're going. With this method, I wish one of the seeds had been bad, but if a seed is hollow in a sense, meaning it doesn't have the proper like structure inside of its shell to produce seed for the following year, it will float to the top. Any seeds that float to the top, discard them, because you know they're not going to work for you in the next season. So I move this water around maybe whenever I think of it. Sometimes it's once a day. And then every day I'll change this water. So the cheesecloth is great here. it's only just for airflow to get in. It's not to like dump the seeds onto you, but you can try that if it works. So I just open this, I take like a sieve or a strainer, and I pour these seeds through it. So I'm left with the seed, and then I suss through them, put them back in a jar, and put more water. If your seeds, especially tomatoes, start to grow little white tails, you have to keep a close eye, then it's time to come out of the water. They've been in a little too long. They can still germinate, but ideally you don't want them to have their tails. But again, if they do, they can absolutely still germinate. But if you see those tails, pull them out. When you put them on your paper towel, when they're in a jar, I should say first, make sure you label the jar. Don't just go by the color of the seed. You don't want to be that person that says, I'll remember, and then you don't. So I put the type of seed. So Hopkin cherry, I put Sentimental Farms 2020, because that's where I got the seed. And then I put September 20th, 2021, which is today. And I put Tia's Garden. So I know where it came from this year. So next year I'll put when I harvested it again, but I'm always going to keep Sentimental Farm, so I know where the original mother seed giver was from. Once these come out of here, I'll take this tape and I'll put it onto my paper towel where these seeds will get transferred to dry for 2 weeks, because you want to make sure they're completely dry before they get stored. So they can dry in like a cool, dry place. And once you're ready, you can then take these dried cherry tomato seeds and you can put them in you can either do a plastic baggie. It's up in arms about the seed saving practice. Of course, plastic is not as environmentally friendly, but it's not susceptible to like humidity changes, which can occur, especially like I'll store these in my cool basement where I know the humidity is less than 10%. You don't want it to be higher because you want to make sure moisture isn't getting into any of this. You can also do a paper envelope, again, more susceptible to changes in humidity, but more environmentally friendly. And you can decorate these more. So it really just depends on what you prefer. So that's up to you. So those are just a few things for those sorts of seeds. If there's any specific seeds, let me know. For things like Nasturtium, which is just the orange flower on the screen there, they provide something called, it's a hip. So you can also eat these hips when they're still green. You can pickle them and they taste just like capers, which is kind of fun. But when they're dry, C is ready. Usually they'll be left underneath of the plant, but you can also dry them as well while they're just still turning brown. But they look like a chickpea. So those, even if you pick something up like this off the ground, you still dry it for 2 weeks. Same with a bean. If you have grabbed, I didn't bring up a bean. If you have grabbed a bean off of your plant, you want that shell to be like dry and crackly, so that when you take your bean out of the shell, your beans, this is a pinto bean, might look like that. And then you still dry that bean for 2 weeks just to ensure that all the moisture has gone out of it for that season. And then you can label it, store it, and put it away. So that's a few things about seeds. When you are doing hot peppers, please make sure to wear gloves. The worst thing in the world is having burning fingertips after just harvesting a few cayenne peppers. Ground cherries are a great thing. That's in the last photo. They're fun to harvest from because you get thousands of seed from one little plant. And you can test all of the germination of your saved seed prior to the next growing season beginning. What I like to do is take a coffee filter or a paper towel, get it damp, like not like sopping wet, but super damp. And then I put a few seeds on that paper towel and then I fold it in half so they're sandwiched. I usually do about 10 seeds only because math, I want to know percentage. And then I'll put it in a baggie so it seals everything in. I again do it in a cool, dry place. Or you can put it on top of a fridge or something just to, it's a bit of warmth to encourage. So I shouldn't say cool, dry place, but encourages just a little bit of warmth, but it's not baking. And then you can see the germination check it every day and you can see if it's grown any tails. And it's nice to do it on the paper towel because you can pull that seed and seed it from your paper towel, which is cool, especially for something like a ground cherry. The taproot can be sensitive, but they can be really hard to actually germinate in soil. So I like the paper towel method. But with that, if you've put 10 on there, you can sort of do the math. If only 5 of the seeds out of the 10 germinated, you know you have a germination rate of 50%, and likely you won't want to use that seed. You'll get new seed, or you're going to plant double as much. It just depends on where you're at. So those are just a few seed saving tips. If, again, anything specific, let me know. I've been saving a lot of flower seeds, and there's so many different options of flowers to go in the garden. I love cut flowers. If you have any questions about that, let me know. You want to invite all the pollinators you can. So it's important to prepare your fall season now, so you can start to grab all the seeds before the flowers are gone, especially right now, especially those zinnia and cosmos heads are just starting to die off. Few other little tidbits is take notes, document everything, plan for your next year. You won't always stay on track with this. I'll tell you, my July and August are completely empty, but it's important to say not just your own seeding, which of course you want to know what was planted, how much, what worked, what didn't, but even just to be able to recognize when the forsythia bloomed, or when the trout lily came up, when your zinnias started to go this season, and maybe the next year they're 2 months later, or if any diseases showed up in certain plots. It's important to know those things just so you can really keep track. In this specific photo, I just used my moleskin here, but this journal here is fantastic. It's a 10-year journal from Lee Valley, which it literally, you can document everything over the next 10 years. Each page is dedicated to 10 spaces per day. So you can sort of see the progress in one day. It's really fantastic. These are just a few native plant nurseries for you. Ontario Native Plants has some great sales going on right now, just because end of season for a lot of their perennials. Things like milkweed and mountain mint, that kind of stuff. Things are sort of fun fillers for bouquets as well, if you're into that. But yeah, there's a lot of different options. Again, reach out to your local farmers for seeds, for seedlings, for garlic. Everyone, they just want to help you grow so much as well. I am a garden mentor, so if you have any questions or want some direction, please reach out by email, just to tia.teft@gmail. So we'll go on to questions, but I'll leave this here if anyone wants to see it, just for the end of the session, if there are. But I think we've hit almost 5 o'clock already. I've gone a little long there, Ryan. But if there are questions, great. But otherwise, feel free to email me here and I'll get back to you.
Thanks, Tia, for the very informative presentation. I can tell you put a lot of work into putting it together.
All right, thank you.
And I definitely learned a lot, and it inspired me to want to plant some Chinese greens in particular. I've got kale and spinach in, but yeah, I think I've got some room for some more.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and yeah, and we're saving tomato seeds here at the library at the moment. And I should also mention, if anybody has any seeds they would like to donate, feel free to drop them off at the library in a bag that's labeled, and then we'll be able to get them into our seed library for next year.
Ryan, do you take anything for seed, or is it just mainly vegetables, or do you take flowers or
mainly vegetables, but we've gotten into flowers too. So yeah, we definitely accept flowers if you have some extras kicking around.
Sure do.
Okay.
Great.
And yeah, so that'd be amazing. Tia. Just a comment from Anna, who is attending. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
So I guess the question I had, I don't know if you've got just something that struck me. Was there anything interesting or unusual that happened gardening this year that you found kind of interesting?
Yeah, well, 2 things actually. The first one is we did get the allium leaf miner, which is why I know exactly what it looks like, which really started to affect a large portion of our garlics. We had to pull about 1/3 of it at the farm we just started all using for cooking, which was fine, but it really does affect the plant right away. So you can't use it anymore because it will eat the plant until it's gone. Right. And then I did a lot of research on aphids because we had some big aphid issues also in my own garden. aphids have a pretty soft skeleton. They're little pests, which can actually come in any color: black, red, green, white, because they usually form to their environment. And they reproduce in any way you can see possible: by egg, by live birth, by giving birth to pregnant aphids already. They just keep on going, and they can give up to 1 billion different eggs a year. So
Wow.
aphids aren't great, but I found
Yeah.
that actually planting pollinators has really deferred a lot of them, like colorful flowers and stuff, because they don't like things that are too scented either, like some sage and chamomile.
Oh, okay.
So that's been very helpful to sort of mix those into our existing garden beds, even though we plant in big rows.
Yeah, I suppose the bigger your garden, maybe the higher the chance that something gets in, or if you do, something does get in, it can really sort of run
Take up the whole thing. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
lousy. Do you experience much tomato diseases or anything like that?
We had quite a few hornworms this year, actually, just at the end of the season. They're always gross, but kind of funny. We go hornworm hunting at night at like 4 a.m. with black lights, because they glow bright green in the purple.
Oh, wow.
Which is cool. But yeah, we did get a little bit of blight and something I believe is called gray mold, which it's just like a mildew, but it does start to affect the leaves of a tomato. The fruit is still good, but eventually it just sort of ends your season early, because it will hollow out your stems too. So once we noticed that coming, we had to strip a lot of our leaves, which obviously decreased photosynthesis. So we just cut the heads off our tomatoes, let them color, and we took them.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always, I know, new adventures in the garden, which is
So
what
amazing. Your
keeps it
garden's good this
interesting.
year?
Pardon me?
Your garden's good? Did the copper wire work?
Yeah. We did raised bed gardens at home, and then here at the library, we just had I think about 7 tomato plants, which did pretty well. So yeah, it's great to be able to harvest the tomatoes here for seed saving. We've got a field placement student from Mohawk who's been working for us just starting last week. So she's doing some seed saving for us, which is great.
Love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I'll just guess because we don't have any questions in the chat, this will end the presentation. And Tia, I'll definitely get you the YouTube link so we can get
thank you.
More people viewing this. I don't know if the election today is
Oh, I'm sure actually, yeah, the dinner rush to go and then to go vote.
yeah. If you're watching this after, we're doing this on the federal election day here in Canada. So anyways,
yeah, go vote.
Yeah, go vote.
Yeah.
Or unless it's in the future, in which case you may have already voted. But
yeah.
Okay. So
next year.
Yeah. So thanks again, Tia, and thanks for attending. And we'll see you around at the library.
Ryan, thank you so much.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
I know.